trust me, I get it. You're feeling the pressure to keep your faith separate from your work, worried that pursuing your God-given dreams might be seen as selfish or misguided. Here's what I've discovered. Our faith isn't a liability in our leadership. As a matter of fact, it's the source of our strength and wisdom. The real challenge is navigating how to boldly pursue our purpose while staying anchored in our faith. And that's exactly what the Beacon Show is all about. Each week, we bring you biblical wisdom and practical strategies from true beacons, Christian leaders who are illuminating the world. And it's also that you can let your light shine brighter and brighter. I'm Tamara Jackson, and this is The Beacon Show. Today on The Beacon Show, we sit down with my new friend Davin, a leader who turned a pivotal moment at Costco into a lifetime mission of purpose. Now, Davin grew up in an Italian Catholic family in Philadelphia, and his early years were marked by constant change and uncertainty. But it was through these challenges that God shaped him into the servant leader that he is today, with a passion for helping others discover their purpose. As the founder of Purpose Point and the author of Finding Purpose at Work and Thieves of Purpose, in this interview, Davin talks candidly about the intersection of faith and business and how that unlikely encounter with Costco's founder taught him that true leadership starts with humility and a simple question: how can I help? In this interview, Davin's story reminds us that God's purpose often unfolds in unexpected ways. So join us for a powerful conversation about stewardship, servant leadership, and finding purpose in every season. Enjoy. Davin, welcome to the Beacon Show, where wisdom meets faith and success finds its voice. We've been having a great time getting to know each other. And I'm so excited about this opportunity to share you with our viewing and our listening audience. Thank you for being here with us today.
Tam, it is my pleasure to be here. I've already enjoyed the conversation we've been having. Can't wait to continue it with your listeners. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, I sense, even as you share that, just with the few moments before we officially hit record, you seem to have a spirit of gratefulness and a humility, which I greatly appreciate. And I'm sure as we go through this conversation, we'll get to learn a little bit more about where that posture came from. I'd love to start with little Davin as a child. It's always interesting to me to learn a little bit about how people grew up, what their life was like, and what they saw for themselves. So can you take us back in time, Davin? Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
You know, it's a place, honestly, that I don't visit often unless I'm asked. But I think it's an important conversation to have because it has shaped in many ways the trajectory of my life and why purpose and the conversation we're going to have is so important. I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Philly. I was born into a 100% Italian Catholic family. You know, I'm the oldest of now 5 kids. At the time, it was just me, and then my younger sister was born, and then my parents went through a divorce. We went to go live with my grandparents who raised me. So my Italian heritage really was a big part of my upbringing. And then over the course of the next, several years, there was a lot of, I'll say, volatility in my life, a lot of uncertainty, moving back and forth between grandparents' houses, parents' houses, and just trying to find some sense of normalism. Got a great relationship with my parents. There's no resentment there at all. But it was just a very unstructured, uncertain childhood. There was not really a lot of stability in it as we floated back and forth to different places. And then we moved from we moved from Philadelphia to Michigan my senior year of high school. And that was a disruptive moment in my life. I thought that there was already a lot of disruption, but that was life-changing. I almost had this identity that was tied to the city of Philadelphia, to my beloved sports teams there. I'm a big Eagles fan. And, so any of your listeners that are Eagles fans, I apologize.
Don't hold it against them.
That's right. But I bleed green. But, moving to Michigan was a big change. I moved from, everything that I had kind of known, family, friends, the sense of identity that was tied to the city and sports, to the middle of nowhere, and didn't know anyone, had no relationships. I was lost. And quite frankly, I was rebellious. Going into Michigan, I had a 4.2 GPA, was on track to go to Penn State University. Despite all of the uncertainty in my younger life, I poured myself into academia. And then moving to Michigan, I just didn't care anymore. And I threw away my senior year of high school, literally threw it away. I missed 32 days of school. I finished with a 2.87 GPA and I went to a community college. Threw it all away. And I was very distant for the next 6 years. And over that 6 year time frame, I decided I wanted to go to school to be a teacher because teachers were the only sense of consistency in my life growing up as things were moving around. And I remember teachers who saw me and value. I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt valued by this sense of structure and predictability that school offered. And so I wanted to have that same impact on the lives of others. That was where I had now placed my new sense of identity as I wanted to be for others what teachers had been for me. And so I went to school to be a teacher, and that didn't happen. Somewhere along the lines of going to school to be a teacher, I got an amazing job working at Costco wholesale and got to meet Jim Sinegal, the founder of Costco, and fell in love with his perspective on culture and leadership and pouring into people. I became a raving, walking, talking billboard for Costco and quickly accelerated in the corporate ladder and never looked back, never went back to school. In many ways, I became a teacher, but in a different way, teaching people leadership and culture and people development and those types of things. So I can see how my childhood set me up for where I ended up and God's plan in that entire piece. In fact, I went from that Catholic upbringing to a point where, I kind of walked away from God for a while. And, it wasn't until I was 24 years old that really God recaptured my heart and showed me what his greater plan was in that, 24 years of what at the time I thought was a mess, but now I can actually look back and connect all the purpose points, all the dots, and see how they led me to exactly where I was supposed to be.
Oh, that's so powerful. And I hope that someone watching us, listening to us is encouraged by that, whether it's for them or their son or daughter who's looking at the situation and feels like, man, this is a mess, that there is purpose in it. And God can take all of those messy details and turn them into something amazing. And we'll share with the audience more about the work that God has now called you to do. I'm curious though, Davin, as I heard you share, do you remember what led you to Costco? I'm always curious to how God orchestrates things to get us in certain places at certain times because timing is also important. Do you remember what even led you to Costco in the first place?
I do. So in Michigan, where we ended up, there's this strip of land that they now call the Golden Corridor. It's just north of Detroit. It's familiarly known as Hall Road or M59. And it's very interesting because I could have worked anywhere really in Michigan. And the very first job that I got when we moved there when I was 18, my senior high school, was at a restaurant called Cooker Bar and Grill. It's no longer there anymore. And then the next job that I got was at Dave and Buster's, which was on that same road about a mile down the street. And then the next job that I got was at Logan's Roadhouse, which was on that same road across the street. And so I was bouncing around all these different restaurants as they opened. I constantly got recruited. I didn't leave. There would be a manager who would leave one and go open another and take me with them. And so I was kind of in this, constant job hopping retail, real sort of restaurant world. And they were rapidly developing this road. And, one day I realized at some point I need to find like a stable job with a real company that offers great benefits. And this was 2001 when Costco was first coming into the market in Michigan. And they had cleared a whole bunch of land, put up a sign in a trailer, and everyone was talking about how Costco was this amazing company. They paid really, really well. They had a great culture. It was really hard to get into. And so I went and knocked on the trailer door, and this guy, Mike Robillard, answered the door, and I'll never forget it. I said, "Hey, I'd love to come work at Costco. I've been a manager of several different restaurants. I'd like to be a manager at Costco." And he looked at me and he goes, "Well, we don't hire any managers from the outside. We only promote from within. If you want to work at Costco, regardless of what your background is, you need to start as either a cashier or a stock clerk. Which one do you want?" And there was a bit, I was a little prideful, right? And I'm thinking, really? But I walked away a little defeated from that conversation. And, I felt this nudge like, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I went back and I said, "How can I help? Where do you need me? Cashier or stock?" And I think he was surprised that I didn't pick, that I asked what their need was. And, they built the building, and, within 3 weeks of starting as a cashier, they made me a front end supervisor. And the reason why was because as people were getting acclimated to their job, I saw people struggling, and I walked around and constantly said, "How can I help? How can I help? How can I help?" The same question that I had asked at the trailer, it's the same question to this day that I tell leaders is the most important question you can ask as a leader. And I think because of that, my constant desire to see people and ask how I can step into the moment and provide value, step into purpose and provide value in those moments to help people, that became kind of a through line of my entire career. I mean, within 9 months, I was the manager there. Within a year, I met the founder and CEO of Costco, and that meeting was life-changing. That meeting with Jim Sinegal literally catapulted the rest of my entire career, and it's something that I constantly continue to talk about and write about.
And to think that it could have not happened if you hadn't been willing to humble yourself. And it's so funny because I don't know if you remember at the top of the call, I said, I sensed this humility. I was like, I'm sure we're going to get to where it came from. And here we are. All of the things, you've said it, that God has been able to do in you and through you are a result of meeting Jim. And you never would have met Jim unless you could have humbled yourself and be willing to take a job that, let's be honest, you were overqualified for.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean and what's interesting is Jim himself was the epitome of humility. One of my favorite quotes around humility is to not think less of yourself, but to think of yourself less. And that came from C.S. Lewis. And there's a lot of people that when they think being humble means they have to tear themselves down, they have to, lower their self-image, minimize their accomplishments. And that's not really what humility is. It really just is being completely other focused. It's not thinking about yourself at all. That's what real humility is. And Jim, when I met him, he was the epitome of that. He walked into the store and came up to me, and he's wearing a name badge that says Jim. I'm wearing a name badge that says Davin. And he walks up and he says, "Hey, Davin." Well, he didn't say, "Hey, Davin, I apologize." He goes, "Hey, I'm Jim. What's your name?" Now, I knew his name was Jim. Everyone knew who he was. And he's wearing a name badge that said Jim. And he knew my name was Davin because I was wearing a name badge that said Davin. But he saw me and wanted to make this human connection. And he right off the bat said, "Why do you work at Costco? What are we doing well? What could we be doing better?" But the question that got me was this: "Davin, what are your goals and dreams? And by working at Costco, are we going to help you fulfill them?" And that sent me sideways. I'm sitting here thinking, he's the CEO of this incredibly successful brand and company. Why does he care whether or not his company is going to help fulfill my goals and dreams? And so he was one of the most humble, present, others-focused leaders that I'd ever met. And that became the standard for me, right? So there was already the seed of humility that was planted. And I think there's a deeper conversation we can have about where that actually came from. But what had happened was God led me to this place where I met a truly humble servant leader that now became the standard by which I measured every other leader that I engaged with, on this side of heaven. Against, right? And continued to talk about and tried to emulate.
So Jim asked you these questions. Where did it go from there? Because it sounds like you said it, if I remember correctly, that was a pivotal moment for you. What did you do? You remember what you told Jim?
Yeah, I did. I said to him, honestly, Jim, I just want to be able to provide a really good earning for my one day family to be able to support them and be a part of a company that other people want to be a part of. It was a very simple answer, honestly. But again, if you look at kind of the root cause behind that, remember I had come from a family that, divorced and there was not stability. So what I was really seeking, the root of what I was seeking was stability. I was looking for stable income, and I was looking for stability in the job and a stable group of people that could be around me because I didn't have stability when I was younger. So, not to put my Dr. Phil hat on, but I can actually kind of see now where that answer came from. And, he looked at me and he said, well, you'll certainly find that here, and we're grateful to have you here, and something along the lines of that. But I was just so impacted by that interaction. The reason it catapulted my career was because this is back in 2001. There's not social media. The biggest and best form, Costco did no advertising. No, there was no TV commercials. There was no billboards. Like their entire marketing plan was to go into a market and just wow people with their story, their culture, and word of mouth just spread. And so I became a walking, talking billboard for Costco everywhere I went. And they made me a marketing manager, and I was talking everywhere I went. And I was playing hockey with the vice president of Macy's. And we were in the locker room one day and we were talking, and I was just, again, walking, talking billboard. So I'm just spewing all of this, Costco culture stuff and Jim Sinegal and servant leadership. And, I was reading Ken Blanchard's books on servant leadership and all of these different, like I had this thirst and hunger to be able to tell the world about what I had found. And the vice president of Macy's basically said, we need you here. And so I didn't want to leave Costco, but one of the things about Costco, because they're so great, they had a very, 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 very low turnover rate. So there's only like 2% of people that ever left Costco. So there was also very stagnant upward mobility.
Yeah, would go up. Yeah.
And so I knew, even though I was being paid really well and I was in a great culture with great people, that I was also kind of at an earning ceiling for a period of time, unless I was, willing to make a leap. But it wasn't about the money. What I saw was, again, coming back to how can I help and stepping into a need, stepping into a purpose. Costco didn't need me. They had it figured out. Macy's did. Macy's said, can you bring that wisdom, that insight, a piece of that culture dust and sprinkle it over here? So I saw an opportunity to step into a need, to step in and help. And that ended up actually becoming kind of a repetitive thing in my career from that point forward. I was recruited everywhere I went from that point forward. 3 years at Macy's and then 7 years at CVS, and then after CVS, I took the leap and started Purpose Point, wrote the book and all those other things. But the common theme kept on being this stepping into a moment where there was a need and then looking at where could I use what gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, insights that I had and make a difference, make an impact wherever I was stepping into. And then that's the direction that I chose to go into. And in essence, that's the foundation of how I talk about purpose. It's not, necessarily how do I get paid to do what I love to do. It's what are your gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, insights, all the things that you have in here to bring to the moment, to give to others, to make a difference, to make an impact. And you should step into more of those moments wherever you're called. And that's, kind of been what the last 25 years has been like.
So for you, Davin, or maybe for our viewing and listening audience too, how do you distinguish when it's one of those moments? I call them defining moments where, like, okay, this is big. I need to pay attention here. I need to step into this. To your point, use my gifts, skills, and talents. And when it's just a good idea. So thinking about our viewing and our listening audience, these are people that are chasing after God, doing their best to honor God in what they're doing. Would you agree that sometimes there are good ideas and there are God ideas, and you can, in some instances, mistake one for the other? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you asked like 3 questions. I'm gonna try to answer all 3
I
in one.
did.
So that's okay. But so, we've often heard that good is the enemy of great. I wouldn't use enemy. I'm not really sure that that's accurate. Jim Collins wrote a great book called Good to Great. And so good is good, but then there's also great. And I think, The Lord says that, right? Many are the plans of a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prospers, right? And so we've got lots of plans that could be used for good. We've got lots of things that we could do that can make a good impact. But there's usually always a greater purpose or a greater plan that God has for us. And it's often rooted in surrender. And most people miss out on the great and settle for the good because they're not willing to surrender. They're not willing to let go. They have their hands so tightly wrapped around their plans, around what they feel is good. And, God's sitting here saying, if you would just open those up and give me that, I'm going to give you something so much greater, more than you could have imagined. And that's not some prosperity gospel. I've seen him do this, right? Going back to Costco, my desires of my heart were to move back to Philly. I wanted to go back to Philly, be by my family, be by my friends, all those things. And when I was working at Costco and I was, got that marketing manager role, they offered me a job to go open the Philly market. I mean, it was like a dream. Higher pay in my hometown. The store was like 5 minutes from where my grandparents lived. My grandparents were aging. I can go live with them, save money, take care of them, work for a great company. And this was like 6 years from after I left Philly. So it was still fresh. So that was a good plan, right? That was a good plan. But I accepted the job. But there was just this uneasiness in me. I have a good friend, his name's Kent Chevalier. He spoke with me at the Purpose Summit last year here in Charlotte. And he's the chaplain of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has been for like 6 years. And I did a talk called What If, and then he did a talk called Do It Afraid. And he has this phrase that he said over and over. He said, I knew in my knower. I knew in my knower. And I asked him to unpack that. And it's like, it's this holy discontent that you have when your actions don't follow and your decisions don't follow what you know in your knower. And so I took this job at Costco in Philly, but I knew in my knower that I wasn't supposed to take it, even though all of my plans made sense. They all made sense and they were good plans. And so there's this image of this little girl. She's holding a teddy bear and she's holding it and Jesus is reaching out to grab the teddy bear and he's got one hand behind his back. And the girl doesn't want to let go of the teddy bear. But what she doesn't see is behind Jesus's back, he's got a teddy bear that's like 10 times the size, right? And I've seen that image for a long time. And this moment at Costco, God brought that image to my face and he said, Davin, if you want to go back to Philly, I'll give you the desires of your heart. I've opened that plan for you. But if you're willing to surrender that, give me that, I've got something so much greater for you here. And I didn't understand it, but I knew in my knower that was the right thing to do. And so I walked into Costco the next day. I surrendered the job. I said, God told me to stay here. And they thought I was crazy. They said, what? This is all you've been talking about for years. Are you kidding me? But I said, God told me to stay here. 3 months after that, and this is a longer story, so I won't tell the whole story, maybe another time, but 3 months after that, I had walked into a new church and I had attended a 20-somethings group. And in that 20-somethings group on the very first day, this girl walked down the steps and that girl sat next to our pastor. And from that moment forward, I stopped listening to whatever he was saying because I was distracted. And 17 years later, that girl and I are celebrating 17 years of marriage. And we've got two beautiful kids, a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and we've lived a very, tumultuous but very fruitful life over the last 17 years. And that would have not happened if I would have followed my plan. I had a good plan, but God had a great plan.
Oh my gosh. There's so much there. I think it would be really easy, Davin, because I hear this with many of the conversations that I have. There's often something that just seems like it's the perfect thing. Like it's everything that I've been wanting, everything that I've been dreaming of. And sometimes, not always, sometimes when we see that, we think, well, that must be God because this is the desire of my heart. It's what I've been praying for, I've been hoping for. And so then we think, well, this must be God. But what you've unpacked for us, and is so important, is, do you have a sense of peace around that decision? Because I think that's what the knower is helping us to see, is like when we can't get to a place of peace about something, no matter how good it looks, no matter how much it aligns with the thing we've been praying about and believing for, if we are not in a place of peace, then to your point, it is something that needs to be surrendered. And then there's an element of trust that has to come into play, that just like with your example with the little girl, that if I give this up because he's a good father, it's somehow going to work out for my good, even though I don't really understand it right now. It doesn't look like it. I don't know why he's asking me for my bear. But like you said, there's a bigger plan. And what I heard in between what you said too is there's a best plan.
That's right. That's right. You know, what you
There's a
just
best
talked
plan.
about. That's right. That's right. What you just talked about with things working out for the good. You know, there's a lot of people that quote Romans 8:28. It's one of my life verses. We all have life verses. Many of us do. But many people cut that verse short. They put a period where there's a comma, because what that verse says is that he works all things out for the good of those who love him, comma, who are called according to his purpose. And so what happens is we've got a lot of people that are like, oh, he makes all things work out for the good of those who love him. My plan, my desires of the heart. It's all going to work out for my good. And then we forget the second half of that, which is who are called according to his purpose, not our purpose. And so often his purpose leads us in a different direction. It often leads us actually away from the desires of our heart. And then he also says, seek the kingdom of God, and then all these other things will be added to you. And so what happens is, if when we seek his purpose first, we get the desires of our heart thrown in on the back end. But sometimes we got to surrender those on the altar first in order to be able to step into his purpose, so that all things can work together for the good, right? And we miss that. I'm walking that right now, Tam. I mean, right now, this move to Charlotte for my family has been really hard for them. Really, really hard. I used the word tumultuous earlier because it has been. Everyone thinks that, oh, Davin, they look at social media, they look at the followers, they look at the books, they look at the Purpose Summit, they look at the story, and they think it's all sunshine and rainbows. It hasn't. It has been a battle. That's why this next book is called The Thieves of Purpose, because it requires fighting those thieves every single day. But when you look at where we're at now, it wasn't my plan to move to Charlotte. It certainly wasn't Amy's plan to move to Charlotte. I mean, we had a church that we were rooted in Michigan for 20 years, that I led worship in, that Amy was in children's ministry in, that our kids, we were married in, our kids were dedicated in. It was our home. We had a house that we built from the ground up. That was our kids' home. We've got family. We've got friends there. I mean, again, that same identity that I had in Philly, that I had to surrender to move to Michigan 25 years ago, full circle. And God said, are you willing to do it again? Are you willing to surrender again and go to a land where you don't know anyone, you don't have any grounding, are you willing to go through it again for my purpose? And because I had done it 25 years ago, it was an easy yes for me. For my family, it wasn't an easy yes. It was a year of praying, discerning, grieving, all of that. But we knew in our knower that it was the right thing to do. And so we still haven't seen the fruits of that. We just found a church that we just are checking out. We've been there twice. We just met a couple friends. I've got some business relationships here that are helping with the summit, but he hasn't restored all of the things that we surrendered to follow his will and purpose here. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we're kind of waiting for him to do that. But even if he doesn't, we know that we followed the direction that we were given.
Oh my goodness. As you were sharing that, my mind went back to, I was sharing with you that I had just met with my spiritual director just a few minutes before this conversation. And as I was meeting with her, one of the things that I shared is what's being impressed most upon me in this season, Davin, is, yeah, it's great to make a lot of money. It's great to meet amazing people, all of these things. But there's this persistent feeling of, I want to know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, that I'm where I'm supposed to be. And the only way that I can have that assurance is if I am truly seeking God, not just, hey, this looks like a good idea. My background experience, best practices say that this is the right path, that God literally has to be the center of the decision making process. And that's what you're illuminating for us right now is when you're at that pivotal moment and you're trying to make a decision, the best decision is the one that God is in, the one that God is guiding you towards, not what looks good based on even your pros and cons list. I mean, it's great to consider those things and to weigh out options, but you've got to be sure that you are going in a direction that God is calling you to, because when you have that assurance, the results, the outcomes are not up to you. That's what you just illuminated for us here is, hey, even if he doesn't, I'm waiting for those things. But even if he doesn't, I have the assurance that I did what I was supposed to do. I'm not going to have regrets looking back thinking, well, I should have done this. I should have done that. I honored what God asked me to do. And sometimes, to your point, we see the benefit of that in this time. Sometimes we don't. But you've made a commitment now to being obedient. And as you have reinforced for us, you have made a pattern of surrendering. How does a leader that is watching us, listening to us right now, how did they get to that place? Maybe they hear you talking and they're like, oh, he's on my street. He's talking to me. Practically, can you walk us through how we get to the place where we can surrender?
So I think there's a couple things. Everyone's in a different place with their walk with God. And nothing that I'm going to say right now is, unless God's going to speak through me, is going to quickly catapult someone into a different place than where they're at right now, right? So they're not going to immediately go from, I can't surrender to, oh, Davin said that and now I can. But I will say this. We were talking about our dogs earlier. In fact, my dog Brinkley is staring at me literally eye to
Let
eye
me in, Dad.
through the glass, like, can I please come in here right now? And he's just begging for me, but I'm not gonna. And there's this story that I once heard about this guy who was given a talk, and he's in a room and he's talking to a whole bunch of people, and the host has a dog, and the dog is in the back of the room, and the dog's barking through his talk. And at some point, the guy stops talking. He goes, hey, man, your dog. And he goes, don't worry about it. Just keep talking. So he keeps talking and the dog continues to bark. And he goes, hey, man, your dog. And he says, don't worry about it. Keep talking. And the guy continues to talk. And he goes, hey, man, your dog. He goes, don't worry about it. He's sitting on a tack. And the guy goes, well, why doesn't he get up? And the guy says, I guess it doesn't hurt enough yet. And I never forgot that story, because the reality is, until the pain of remaining the same is greater than the rate of change, you won't get up. You won't move. You won't surrender. You will continue trying to do things your way, settling for the good, walking like you have to control every decision. And I had gotten to the place where the pain of staying the same was too painful. I couldn't continue this level of uncertainty, this level of holy discontent, this level of not having confidence in what was happening and in all of the dysfunction and change that was happening in my life. I couldn't handle it anymore. And so when I found out that there was a God who had a greater purpose, who had a greater plan, and that if I were willing to let go of my plan, my dreams, my goals, my desires, all of those things, and say, okay, God, what do you want for my life? Let's try it your way. Once I did that, the pain went away. And so that doesn't mean it's been easy. It's actually been harder, but it's been less painful. So I'm going to say that again. It's been harder, but it's been less painful. And so I have, long equated kind of the last, particularly 10 years of my life journey to one long walk along the floor of the Red Sea. I continue to tell people, welcome to the floor of the Red Sea. When they make the decision to take the step forward to surrender, I say, welcome to the floor of the Red Sea. And the reason why is you have to realize the dynamic of what was happening there. The Israelites had left Egypt and they had prayed for freedom for years from slavery. And they finally get this opportunity. And there was a different way to get to the promised land. They could have not gone to the Red Sea, but had they went that way, they would have missed God's purpose in what he was doing. God brought them to the edge of the Red Sea to bring them to a point of surrender. And they were given a choice, right? Like go back to Egypt and be slaves or continue to move forward. And they were whining and complaining, why'd you bring us out here? We would have been better off in Egypt. Now we're going to die in the desert. Wah, 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 wah. Right? And then, God parts the Red Sea and they walk through it. Now, a lot of the pictures that you see of this are them walking, singing songs, carrying chariots, smiles on their faces. That is not what that was like. And I wasn't there, but I could probably tell you. I mean, think about this. You're walking along the floor of the Red Sea. There's mountains of walls of water that you've never seen being held up supernaturally, and you can't see the other side. You got to be thinking at any moment, these things can come tumbling down. I'm going to drown. We don't know where we're going. How long until we get there? Right? My kids constantly say, how long until we get there? Imagine how much longer they were screaming to Moses. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? The Egyptians are bearing down on them with certain death. They were panicking. This was not a jubilee, right? And they get to the other side, and here's what happens that people don't know the other side of the story. The water washes overside the Egyptians, and the Egyptians had the best weapons, the best technology of the day, and all of that stuff washes up on shore, and now the Israelites are equipped with what they need to go into the land that God was calling them to fight the giants that awaited them in that land. And had they gone the other way, they would have not been equipped and they would have not been able to fight. And so God's purpose, God's plan was greater, but they had a choice to make. Go back to the same or surrender that and move forward. And the pain of remaining the same was greater than the pain of surrendering that and moving forward.
You bring up such a good point. And I don't know that I've of course, heard the story, read the story many times. I don't know that I connected the equipping piece that you just brought out for us. All the things that the Egyptians had washing, I just pictured that washing up on the shore. They needed those things. And many of us watching, listening, God knows that you have need of things. The thing is that how he gets you those things may be a very different way, route, process than you were expecting, but he knows that you have need of these things and he is orchestrating things so that you have them.
That's right.
How, on that point, Davin, how has that been true for the work that you are now doing around purpose? You mentioned the Purpose Summit. I shared with you before we hit record that I was bummed that I didn't make it to 2024, but it's going to be here in Charlotte 2025, and I'm going to make it my business to be there. When you look back on all of the experiences that you've had, the ups and the downs, how have those things equipped you to do what you're now doing?
That's such a great question. And I don't want my answer to sound self-promotional, but there's a reason that God gave me the two books that are now written. The first one, Finding Purpose, was I used to ask myself a lot the question, why? Why, God, are you doing this? Why, God, are you doing this? Why am I walking through this? Why did I have to go through this? Why did you have to do that? And we all ask that question in some point in our lives. And there's a lot of people to this day who don't have those answers and are calloused and distant from God because they don't have those answers. And there's some answers that we never get the answer to. But then I had a pastor of mine at our old church. He once gave a talk and he said, we're asking the wrong question. We shouldn't be asking why. We should be asking what. What, God, is it that you are doing? What, God, is it am I supposed to learn through this? What, God, am I supposed to do in this? Because when you start asking what, it allows you to find purpose in the moments that we are asking why in. And so when I wrote Finding Purpose at Work, it was a compilation of me finding purpose in moments where I was asking why, and both personally and professionally. Finding Purpose at Work, while the creative title was meant to, insinuate finding purpose in your job, which I do talk about in that book, that wasn't the premise of the book. And I talk about it in there. The premise of the book was looking back over your life. And if purpose had a persona, if you looked at purpose as almost God's hand over your life, you could see his hand at work in your life when you start connecting the purpose dots of what it was he was doing. And so that was the impetus for the first book. The second book, Thieves of Purpose, is over the last couple of years, I've kept on asking myself, why don't more people step into this? Why are there so many people that are settling for the good and missing out on the great? What is robbing them of stepping into their purpose? And over the last 5 years, I came up with 12 things. And I decided that I was going to put those 12 things in a book and call it The Thieves of Purpose. And if I'm being honest, which I usually am, I try to be all the time, when you hear people say they've written the book on something, that insinuates that they're the subject matter expert. They have figured it out. But here's the thing. I may have gleaned some insights. I may have been given some divine wisdom. I may have some experience that I could share with others. I've done some research to connect the dots. But the truth is, I still struggle with all 12 of those thieves. And I share that in the beginning and say, listen, this is real and raw. And I am talking to you about, here's the 12 things that I've walked through, that I've been equipped with to be able to be in this place right now, to be able to give you to step into whatever it is you're being called in, so that you could be equipped and step into the fullness of the potential and the purpose that you were created for. And so I look at kind of all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of the circumstances, everything that I've had to overcome over the last 44 years as tools that have been washed up along the shore for me to be able to give to others to step into whatever journey awaits them.
When I hear you talk about Thieves of Purpose, it's really hard to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm not speaking to you from a place of, I figured all this out and I've got it, lit, to, hey, I'm kind of on this journey with you. I'm walking beside you as we're going through here. It's just that I now know how to name these things because because I know them so well. I'm curious, was that your original plan for the book? Did you intend to be, I was going to say, most of the time that's not. So what got you to the point where you were willing to put that in writing and make that the approach for the book?
Yeah. So chapter 1, I actually talk about this. So I had to write this book twice. The first time I wrote the book, I had written 15 chapters and it was almost done. And I was going in to edit it. And I kept on clicking on the icon on my computer and it wouldn't open. And I don't know why. And I kept on checking it on my phone and it wouldn't. Why? I went to the cloud. It wouldn't open. And I looked for, right click, there's zero data. There's the picture of the book, but there's no data. And I even contacted Apple. I've got a really good friend of mine he's like a whiz. And they're like, listen, there's no data behind this icon. I mean, literally God erased the book, completely erased the book. And I was discouraged. I'm like, a year and a half of writing in 15 chapters gone, right? I didn't print it. It wasn't sitting somewhere. I just, had it on my computer, had it on my phone, had it in the cloud. It wasn't backed up to a hard drive. But the book that I had written was not this book. The book, it was the same title, but the book that I had written, I did position myself as an authority on the matter because I felt like in order to be able to step into certain circles, I needed to, right? And there was this complex of, here's this, authoritarian that didn't graduate with a 4-year degree that is telling you, pulling all this stuff together, that this, from a very academia standpoint, is how you identify and combat these things. And that was not the book that God wanted me to write. So the title stayed the same. The thieves stayed the same. The chapter title stayed the same. The content of the book completely different from what God erased from my computer. And so he didn't give me a choice. He basically said, start over. And so I did. And I'm glad that I did, because I'm much happier that I wrote a book that feels like I'm in this with you and not speaking back at you.
Perhaps that's because of some of the great leaders that you've worked alongside in your journey. You talked about Jim earlier. It's very common in the business world, in the author world. I want to be an authority on this subject. God wanted, to your point, you to approach this book from a different angle. Why do you think it would be important for us to be willing? That may not always be the stance that God asks us to take, but why might it be important sometimes to walk alongside instead of running ahead of those that we're leading?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's a lot of answers to that question. In fact, I literally just shared a post on this on my social media last week about just even looking back over my last 17 years of marriage and, our new season here. And the post that I shared, one of the chapters in the book is on success and how success is one of the 12 thieves of purpose. And a lot of time we have this thirst, this hunger for success, right? We want to be the one that gets the prize. We want to be the one that gets the accolades. We want to get the credit. We want to achieve more and more and more and more. We want to be in the echo chamber. We want all of that stuff. And so a lot of times we feel like we need to run ahead of others to get it. We need to prop ourselves up. We need the position. We need the posture. We need to, right? Especially in today's social media world. Oh my gosh, everyone is a subject matter expert on everything, right? I love the people who are coming out of school. They're 23 years old and they're life coaches on LinkedIn. That's my favorite. I love that. They're calling me every single day. I work with I work with high net worth coaches. Can I work with you? And I'm like, well, number one, I'm not a high net worth individual. So do your research. Anyway, long story short, but we have this thirst for success. And one of my favorite proverbs, not proverb from the Bible, but an ancient proverb was, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I had this thought, and I was looking back at kind of my life and realized that, man, personally, when it came to, and what I argue in the chapter of success is that the world conditions us for success, but we were created for significance. And most people, the price they pay for success is at the cost of their own significance. They are so focused on success that they miss out on, so they're so focused on the good that they miss out on the great, right? And so I read a book called Halftime by Bob Buford that changed my life, and a while ago, back in 2016. And that book argues that, if you pursue significance, you'll be successful in the things that matter. And so what I had done was that I looked back over my life and I'd realized, man, I had been running fast and hard ahead of my wife, ahead of my kids, ahead of other people who had been on this journey with me. And I went fast, but I realized that I wasn't going to go far, that this was not going to be sustainable. And I needed to slow down, and I needed to start running alongside. I was so focused on running for people that I forgot that I was supposed to be running with people. And so I think a lot of times we become so busy in this life that we're so focused on what we need to get done that we miss out on the purpose that's right in front of us. We've become human doings rather than human beings. And so I challenge people that, because I've challenged myself, where am I running too far ahead? Why am I so focused on what I need to get done? And am I missing out on someone that I'm supposed to be right now, somewhere I'm supposed to be right now, and what I'm supposed to be doing in the moment? And the more that you have that perspective, the more that you'll slow down and you'll run with people, and the more that you will find yourself stepping into more and more moments of purpose and significance.
Such a powerful answer. I'm always amazed at how quickly time goes. We're out of time. So, David, I appreciate you being here with us. I want the audience to get just a couple more pieces of wisdom from you. When you think about everything that you poured into, because God took your first book, into Thieves of Purpose, to help the person that recognizes through what you've described that I've probably had some moments of purpose stolen from me. What is a piece of advice that you could give them? We're going to make sure that they have the link to get the book. But as they're watching us, as they're listening to us right now, what is one piece of advice that you can give them to help them to start getting on the right track?
If I could give you 2 words, I'm going to give you 4 words. Sorry. 2 words first, and then another 2 words. The first 2 words are be present. And I know that that sounds extremely simple, but it's extremely hard. We are really, really bad at being present. I'm really bad at being present, and I write about it, right? I love it. My wife will nudge me, right? Sometimes if we're sitting in a room or wherever we're at, and we've created this habit of like looking at our phone every 15 seconds. And the second that I touch it, she'll say, "What are you doing?" And it's like a bell with a dog and saliva. It's a Pavlov reaction. I'll stop and put my phone down, right? Be present, because the more moments that you're present in, the more moments of purpose you experience, the greater impact that you make. And then you'll start to string those things along together. You'll see a pattern. And here's the beautiful thing. The reason that we continue to chase all these other, all this stuff, success, likes, engagement, followers, you name it, is because there is a psychological need for dopamine, this dopamine hit that we need, that we constantly need to have. But the greatest dopamine hit that we get is when someone says thank you. The greatest dopamine get that we get is when someone says, "I appreciate you." When they tell you that you matter, that you made a difference, that you made an impact. And we miss out on so many of those because we're chasing after the wrong dopamine. And so be present, and you'll find yourself fulfilled. The more that you choose not to be present, the more you will find yourself longing to be fulfilled. The other 2 words that I'm going to give you are what if. A lot of times, the reason that we don't step into the unknown is because we're fearful. A lot of times, the reason that we don't surrender is because we're fearful. And so what I would leave you with is, what if your what if is an invitation to your purpose? What if that thing that you're struggling with, that holy discontent, that thing that you're like, I don't know if I can surrender this. I don't know if I can let go. I don't know if I could take that risk. I don't know if I can step out into the unknown. And you're telling yourself all of these what if stories, negative stories of what might happen that 91% of the time never materialize and won't come true. What if those what ifs are the actual invitation, the nudge that God is calling you to say, give me that and watch what I'll do with it. Step out and watch what I'll do with it.
One final question. Davin, when all is said and done, what is it that you would like to be remembered for?
That's a hard question to ask. And I've been wrestling with this personally, because there's a lot of people who I highly respect who are no longer with us. And I'm saddened by how quickly the world has forgotten them, so quickly. And so much of their life and work that they've poured into. And there's one recently who was my age that wrote a fantastic book. His name's Sean Rowland. He wrote a book called Giftology, left behind 4 kids and his bride. And he was just soloed. His life was just celebrated a couple of weeks ago. And it really made me think about this question, because at the end, it doesn't matter whether I write 1 book, 2 books, or like Ken Blanchard's 62 books. Today, when I mention Ken Blanchard's name, very few people know who he is. And he's still alive. He's 84 years old. But people don't know who he is. So I thought, well, it doesn't matter whether I write 2 books or 62 books. People aren't going to remember that, and they're not going to remember me. And so we were talking earlier about this word called legacy earlier. And I think there's a lot of people that they miss out on their life because they're too busy building a legacy. That often won't be remembered. And the words that came to me when you asked that question earlier, Tam, were the legacy of now. Stop thinking about what you'll be remembered for and start thinking about what people are saying about you now, not once you're gone. Because history books aren't going to write about you. The world's going to forget about you. And even if you accomplish something really, really great, like, everyone knows Steve Jobs, and his legacy with Apple. But do you remember anything else about Steve Jobs? I mean, the man built one of the greatest companies on the planet and created a ton of wealth for himself. But the world knows very few details about who he actually was. But he made an impact while he was here. And so, to answer your question, what I want to be remembered for is someone who fought to be present as much as possible in every moment and stepped into those moments with a posture of, how can I help? How can I help people be a little bit better off than when I found them? Who have I helped others become? Who have I helped my kids and my wife become? And who have I helped those who my life touched become?
So much wisdom, Davin. Thank you so much for pouring out your heart here with us today. I know there have been so many things that you have said that have been a blessing to our audience. We certainly speak God's blessings over you and the work that you do, over your family as you're getting rooted and grounded here in Charlotte, that God will connect you to the right people, that he will open the right doors, and that his purpose, his plan for you being in Charlotte will be revealed, and that you will be blessed by your time here. Thank you again for being with us and for sharing with our listening audience today.
Thank you, Tam, for being such a gracious host. It was an honor to be your guest and have this conversation today. Grateful for you.